This hits the spot. What's going on, you guys? Back again. Good old Kensou, right? Your host with the most. New coffee with Kensou. Today I want to talk about something we've talked about several times on the stream and in other videos here on YouTube. And it is accessibility in fighting games. And I have some kind of new thoughts about this. You guys just, hear me out on it. See what you think. Tell me about how you feel in the comments below about this. But I kind of wanted to revisit this because I think that this topic is, while it's kind of like beating a dead horse, I think it's also something that we should revisit from time to time. And I think that accessibility in fighting games isn't necessarily a bad thing. And I will tell you guys why. Let's start with the gaming industry as a whole. The gaming industry right now is filled with a gigantic casual market, right? And a lot of people in general who play games nowadays don't really have time, especially people who are up in age in comparison to like younger kids, right? And a lot of people play a lot of games on their cell phones. That's why a lot of RPGs and things like that have been ported to, cell phones and mobile devices, Game Boys, PSPs, Vitas, all kinds of stuff, right? And look at the portability of even like the Switch, right? Because it's gaming on the go, because you're not always going to be able to sit in front of your TV and stuff like that. So this is the market that we're in now. This is the generation of gaming that we're in now, right? Back in the day, those things were really good and they did their thing, right? And I know back then, especially in the NES days, someone who grew up in the Nintendo era, right? A lot of those games were really difficult. A lot of games nowadays aren't really as hard as those games. Nowadays, a lot of the gaming industry wants easier and accessible games across the board. It doesn't matter what genre. It's just a lot of people just feel like they don't have time to sit here and try to figure out these puzzles, right? Or figure out or figure out how to beat a certain boss. They want to play on the easiest mode, beat the game, go to their friends and say, yeah, this game was easy, blah, blah, blah. I didn't have a difficult time. You know how we all have those friends that like play games on like easy or like normal and then talk a good game about how the game was easy and all. And yeah, this was no problem. Yeah, those guys kind of sort of still exist. And those guys are unfortunately some of the people who kind of pushed the agenda for the games to be a lot easier nowadays, right? And accessibility even goes back to, I can take it, for example, Final Fantasy 7 to Final Fantasy 8, right? Now, just hear me out, because I know some people are probably going to blow me up on this one, but just hear me out before you crucify me. Final Fantasy 7 to Final Fantasy 8, there was one thing in particular that was complained about back in the day, right? That was kind of remedied in Final Fantasy 8, specifically the summons, right? Summons took so long in Final Fantasy 7, especially some of the later ones, or like, it costs a lot of MP, basically, right, to do those things. And so those were like your nuke everything type spells, you know what I mean, in the game. And they simplified that and just made you be able to just hit summon and then just mash your square button to do the more damage on it, like at any given point in time. And sure, there were different points where you had to mash and whatnot, but they had to make it somewhat more difficult than just, all right, you can summon at any time and get base damage, right? So they added a way for you to, deal more damage and kind of, push that forward, right? So it just goes to show that like people even back then complained about certain things and like they readjusted it in the next game. And it's like that in other games too. And a lot of RPGs in particular, as far as I'm concerned, I think kind of push that, right? And some other games, to be honest with you, even like the old school Ninja Gaiden series, right? NG1 is a really hard game, right? To the point to where like if you die in the last stage, they throw you all the way back to the beginning, right? And that was very like, as a kid for me, I'm just like, man, what the hell? Why I get put all the way back to the beginning? I gotta do this all over again, and then get to the boss. And then, yeah, sure, they let you do the bosses. Like as you kill one boss, you can get to the next boss after you killed the first one, right? So you don't have to go through the entire thing. You just gotta go through the entire stage to get to the boss again. And that right there in itself is like, man, that's difficult. So, they made Ninja Gaiden 2 a lot more easier. And to be honest with you, that, in my honest opinion, is one of the hardest. Ninja Gaiden 1 is one of the hardest, but Ninja Gaiden 2 is like one of the easiest, right? And then they like, for whatever reason, ramped up the difficulty for whatever reason on the American version of Ninja Gaiden 3 on the NES. And, the story goes on and on. I can talk all day about how, like, Castlevania 1 to Castlevania 2 was difficult. Because Castlevania 2, like, gosh, that game was not very descriptive for a game that has a lot of dialogue in it, right? and you know, Castlevania 3. It's like the whole nine. I can talk about these old school games all day long, right? But the point here I'm trying to make is like, back then they tried to make games that were difficult because gaming at that time was still new, you know, and I feel like because gaming was new back then, they can try people, you know, try to get people to puzzle, you know, solve, try to get people to try to appreciate these types and genres of games, because back then those were new. Now they're not really, it's not so much new, you know, they're taking from pre-existing shells and adding to these things, right? So where does this lead to now, right? Where I'm going with this is that even nowadays, you know, like I love the Ninja Gaiden series to death, you know, Neo, you know, Sekiro, Dark Souls, like I love those games because they provide a challenge that I love about gaming. And it's really cool to still be able to play those single player games and find that challenge, you know, overcoming bosses in like, you know, those games, it feels very rewarding. Now, it doesn't mean that people don't find ways to cheese it and make it easy, right? You know, that's what, you know, all these other people tend to do with these games, right? But that's also part of the depth of the game, and that's what makes it fun. Like, you find easier and more streamlined ways to beat these bosses or to complete the game. You know, that's how speedrunning kind of comes along, right? People find optimal ways to like do these things in these games, right? So the games, while they may be difficult, they become easier as you continue playing, right? So that's the fun part of, you know, these games. They're difficult, but like you find more streamlined ways to make them fun. In terms of fighting games and just competitive gaming in general, and this is where I'm leading to, making things easier for people has done nothing but wonders for each genre of game. Like from FPS to, you know, fighting games, like they've done wonders in terms of making their player base larger, right? I understand on one front, some people very much so, like, you know, like they pride themselves on being able to do like the hard thing, you know, like as someone who like came up in the early stages of the FGC, and not even the earliest, like I'm still considered like new school. I'm old school now, but I'm considered new school by old school standards, right? And it's like those games, like CVS2 was hard, you know, Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, that game is hard. The old Guilty Gears, those games are hard. Marvel 2, those games are hard. Like those games are actually executionally hard, you know. And back then they designed the games around both execution and strategy, but they still had easy to play characters, right? Coffee. So despite having like easy mode characters, you know, you still had like your difficult characters, right? So we can look at Marvel 2 for a second. Like Cable is in general like an easy character to play, and if you see him at high level, he's a lot harder, right? But the general gist of Cable, like if you understand how to like play Cable in a general sense, like he's pretty hard to beat. And then when you get to high levels of play, that becomes effective, but the player has to be really good at that, you know? Like you can't just pick up Cable as like a new player and expect to beat someone who's really good, especially in those times, right? Which kind of moves into the next topic I'm getting into with this is, or the next ideal, right? Is that just because it's easier, it doesn't mean that like newer players are gonna beat legacy players. It's just, it doesn't always happen that way. And I know on one front, we can argue things like maybe Street Fighter 5, right? Like some of the old Street Fighter 4 guard isn't as strong as Street Fighter 5. Understandable. It is also, I think it should also be understood, and it shouldn't be taken away that just because it's called Street Fighter, it doesn't mean that your prestige from a previous Street Fighter game is going to make you a Street Fighter 5 god. It's just not going to happen. You still have to readjust to the new game's nuances in order to be the best player that you can be. And I think that that's something that gets taken away from the accessibility portion, right? I understand that Street Fighter 5 in particular was designed to help newer players initially to, you know, be able to have more exciting matches against, you know, long-term legacy players, right? But that started to shift drastically over the course of time, right? And I watched Street Fighter 5 pretty closely, right? And the same people who have been on top since roughly season 2 are like the same people who are still on top now. You know, Punk is probably one of the biggest examples of being able to come up despite this quote-unquote accessibility, because Punk is one of the best players in that game. And like the accessibility, while it may have helped him, it doesn't change the fact that he's smart. He's a very smart player, and he's outsmarted some of the best players in Street Fighter history. You know, and yeah, it's Street Fighter 5, but that's also, you know, that's a testament to the amount of work that he put in. It wasn't like Punk just woke up and he just became the best player in like Street Fighter 5, you know. He put in a lot of work to get there, and that goes for a lot of people, you know. Daigo, Tokido, you know, MOV, you know, JB. There's so many people, even some of the American players. Look at Smug. Smug is crossed over from Street Fighter 4 and has been playing Street Fighter 5, and he plays it very well. He plays at a very high level. You know, 801 Strider is one of my favorite players. You know, like, so many people have made the crossover from the next game and were able to adapt to that one. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that for those guys, it probably was an easy process. I'm sure it was very difficult to come from 4 and go to 5 and find all these nuances and be like, you know, bump this game. You know what I mean? And that's a lot of people, myself included. You know, I played 4 and then moved to 5. And I'll be honest, I wasn't the biggest fan of 4, but I respected high level play. Street Fighter 5 to me was like, I don't know what I'm doing in this game. But, you know, the game's rounded itself out. And I'm not trying to make this all about Street Fighter 5, right? But the point here is the accessibility. While it helped a lot of newer players, it also just doesn't, like, the same people who are in top 8 or the same people who are in top 8. Some people, you know, in other games, you know, I won't stick here on Street Fighter 5, but like, making a game easier just does not mean that the old guard is just going to continuously lose. You know, that doesn't mean that like the old guard will win all the time either. But if you've played fighting games long enough, transitioning over into something shouldn't be as difficult. You know, there are always going to be nuances, and I admit to that straight up. As a longtime player, moving from game to game in the series, sometimes that can be difficult. It can be challenging. It can be trying. It can be some of the most annoying stuff in the world, because it's like, why did you change this from a design standpoint when you could have kept it this way? And I get it. I am someone who definitely prides themselves on their execution. Like, trust me, I play Guilty Gear from, you know, I've been playing Guilty Gear for a long time. And like, my execution over the course of time just got better and better and better. And then, you know, Chip's execution didn't get any easier in Extra, to be honest. Some things they made quality of life changes just to make it accessible for some people who just want to play Chip. But like, never was I ever like, man, they made, you know, wall cling alpha so easy now. It's like, it's a quality of life change. All I have to do is hold a button. Okay, no problem. I'll make this easier. It makes it easier for me. It makes it easier for the people who want to play Chip, so they don't have to stress out so hard about like, jump install this, jump install that, because jump install is like the only other thing that keeps Chip execution very high, if you ask me. And it's not like, you know, I don't know, all I'm trying to get at here is like, he's still one of the higher execution characters in Guilty Gear, but they streamline certain things to allow the player to focus on just playing him well. And I think that's kind of what this boils down to, right? They're making these games quote unquote easier because they want you to focus more on strategy and less on execution. They want, when you land a hit, they want you to be able to do damage. I understand on some fronts that is like, to some people it might seem like that's too free, but like the older games, hit confirming was really hard. Marvel 2, in my honest opinion, is one of the hardest games you can hit confirm in, like, period, right? Because straight hits don't have you like sitting in the air for like 900 frames or like 30 seconds, you know? Some of the newer games, yeah, the hits done in the air is a lot larger, and it allows you to make, you know, easier confirms. Or you getting counter hit in the air leads to a lot. So for example, like Melty Blood is like an older game, right? Melty Blood, if you get hit, if your character has a really good jump A, like you get counter hit and it's like your character just drops to the ground, you know, on a counter hit jab. You know, it's one thing if you get hit by a counter hit jump H, you know, or like some big, like a bigger button and it cause like a longer stun like that, right? But you get hit by a jab and you're floating in the air for like a hot minute and they get to confirm on their way down, barring your character. I know it's not like that for everybody. But like, I played like what, H-Aoko, and H-Aoko jump A, like, oh, you got hit by that on my way up, cool. You know, now I'm gonna be able to confirm, barring, you know, the situation, barring how you got hit, etc., etc. But like, the point I'm trying to make is like, even for an older game, they allowed like a counter hit state that's like that. And in newer games, like normal hit states and counter hit states are all similar to that. You know, like they stay in the air kind of long, you're able to confirm. So they want you to be able to see these things and be able to do damage. Like single hit confirms are like a skill in, you know, Street Fighter 5 and even Street Fighter 3, like Chun-Li, low forward and super, like that's a hit confirm skill. Like that is, you have to visually confirm that. I'm not saying you wouldn't pre-buffer, right? Like low forward and start buffering, You know, so quarter circle forward into down, medium kick into quarter circle forward again to hit the super, right? Because you're pre-buffering off one and then finishing the motion to, you know, kill your opponent. That stuff is still like in existence right now, but like I think people forget that those are actual skills that you kind of need. And even Guilty Gear Strive has a lot more single hit confirms than they've ever had in any other Guilty Gear game. And it's really cool to see that. Because more often than not in Guilty Gear, it's mostly like you got counter hit by something, okay, you see it, and you go for it, you know. But in Street Fighter and other games, you know, Street Fighter in particular, especially Street Fighter 3, like single hit confirms is like, that's a huge thing. That's a big time skill. So I think that is a part of the games that are still around. Now regarding things like, and this is going to be kind of a long video, you guys. I'm going to be ranting for a bit. I'm not going to front. Let me get this coffee right fast. So let's take a moment to address things like auto combos for a second, right? Auto combos, as far as I'm concerned, are not necessarily a bad thing. Auto combos have been around since like what, Persona? Games like Under Night In-Birth have auto combos. Was it Smart Steer? That's what it's called, if I believe right. And I feel like even KOF14 has auto combos, right? It's like the auto combos don't necessarily like, they're not necessarily bad, you know, especially in some of these games where the auto combos don't do that much damage. But games like BB Tag and like, you know, Dragon Ball, like the auto combos are kind of like a thing, you know, that's kind of how you get your damage. In fact, that is how you get your damage in a lot of cases. But like, just because the auto combos exist, it doesn't take anything away from like combo execution. Like sometimes some of these combos require timing. Like Dragon Ball has a lot of links, and as someone who plays like you know, base Goku, his links are really annoying in some cases, to the point where I don't even like going for them, because online you can just drop them pretty easily. And same thing with, you know, I play Super Broly as well, and like some of those links are pretty annoying, you know. So what am I getting at here? Just because a game has auto combos doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't have its difficulty factors, you know. They made sure to make sure, like I feel like in Dragon Ball, they made sure to add things like links in there to make it so that you have something else to go for. It doesn't mean that you can't just go for the simple combos, do your easy damage, and just go from there, right? But what does the auto combo have to do with strategy, right? In some cases, you got characters like Bardock and other characters who have really good auto combos in Dragon Ball who can kind of just put them out there. But if you think about it, they had to whiff a normal to get to that next one, right? So what does that entail for you? That means you can punish it with a Ki Blast and to vanish and then punish them, right? That's their fault for throwing it out there. So like, just because, I guess what I'm trying to get at here is like, there still is risk reward, right? It is definitely an annoying thing to deal with in some cases, right? You know, a Bardock player just mashing the square button trying to get at you, or Ultra Instinct mashing square trying to get to you. I understand that those are like issues, right? Like those things can be problematic, but that's part of the game. The idea is that they had to whiff a normal prior to that to get to you in order to make that a thing. And if you're aware of that and you can catch on to what that player is doing, then that means you can punish them. So that player now has to think about not using that auto combo so freely, because you showed that you have the ability to punish them. Which is why I'm saying, like, just because there's an ease of use factor for the game as a whole, it doesn't mean that everything is free. It doesn't mean that like every new player is going to be a problem, you know, in the game. I feel like a lot of times when, and I know this might sound bad to some people, but I feel like a lot of times when people say and or kind of retort with these things, it just feels to me like you're afraid to lose your prestige, when like, I feel like people undervalue their skill as a player, and because they feel like it's easier now, so this newer player is going to always beat me. It's like, that's not the case. Like, if you're smart about fighting games and you have a lot of experience, like you should be able to overcome that. If you're like, I feel like it's a big time mental block. I think it's a mental block for some people to want to feel like a new player is just going to beat you, or this is easier, therefore like 9,000 people are going to beat me. No, what it means is like, since it's a lot easier, more people are willing to play it. Fighting games back then did not have the appeal it has now. And there are a lot of people who would play Guilty Gear, but they were afraid to play back then because, or the older versions of the game, not even just back then, but they were afraid to play because they're like, I heard this game was hard, you know, and I've spent the better half of like 3 or 4 or 5 years trying to tell people this is not that hard. I've been trying to ease people into it with like, you know, commentary, you know, analysis and breakdowns to let people know that there's a nuance to the game, and there are little things you have to pay attention to, and there are things that you won't see, and I'm here to show you that. in addition to that, you can get into this if you put your time and your effort into it, because obviously playing a game like Guilty Gear or any other fighting game for that matter is going to take time to be good. Like a new player, a fresh fighting game player who's never played a fighting game in their life isn't going to beat any player who's been playing for like years. You know, it's just not going to happen. That doesn't mean that there aren't people who can pick up games quickly, right? But there's still like game nuances. There are still things that like they still have to learn, that like if you've been playing fighting games, so let's say you've been playing fighting games for 5 years, right? New fighting game comes out. So we'll use Guilty Gear Strive Out. You've been playing fighting games for a long time. You played the beta. You know, you understand yourself. You understand how to play the game. You know, and you've been playing fighting games for a good amount of time. Some new person who picks up Strive, you know, you're not gonna just lose to that person. You know, even if they pick the best character in the game, they're not just gonna beat you. They still have to go through the same trials and tribulations that you had to go through in order to get to the point that you're at now. Like, they're not gonna pick up. So let's say Zato's the best character in the game. A puppet character, you're gonna tell me some new player is gonna pick up a puppet character and be amazing at the game just like that within less than a year? That's just not gonna happen. Without any fighting game experience, it's not gonna happen. Like, that's like me stepping into Apex right now. I have like very little experience in shooting games. Very little. I'm not gonna front you guys. I have very little experience in shooting games, right? I've had you know, some time with Counter-Strike and some other shooters, right? Unreal Tournament, stuff like that, but I didn't play like that, you know. I didn't really get into it like that. I just played with my friends and just kind of dicked around and had my little ha-has and hee-hees. But I'm playing Apex seriously now, and it's like, I'm not beating an Apex Predator in like less than a year. That's just without any prior experience. No way, it's just not happening. Those guys are gonna sit there and look at me and laugh and just clap me all day long. In fact, I can't even get to their bracket right now because I'm not in the Apex Pred. You know, I'm in like silvers and bronze. The split just happened. You know, I got re-put back into bronze, but whatever. Point is, you know, without experience, there's no way I'm gonna beat those guys. It's not happening. And it's the same with fighting games. Just because it's more accessible, it doesn't mean that like you can look at Apex. Apex is accessible. And again, I'm not beating Apex Predators. It's not happening. I'm not even getting in their lobbies. Or even if they get into my lobbies and pubs, they're gonna smoke me left and right. Every single time. They have the game awareness. They have the map awareness. It's the same thing here. If you're an experienced player, you have the game sense. You understand how to play fighting games. You're just not gonna lose. It's just, I think it's a gigantic fallacy, and I think I would love to see people jump off of this. And I know I've been ranting on this for a little while, guys, but I feel like this is a topic that kind of needs to be, like I said, I don't mind coming back to this topic every now and again. But, you know, the games being more accessible allows for us to have more players to play with. Back then, Guilty Gear was nowhere near as big as it is now, and it's getting bigger, especially with how Strive is working, right? A lot of people, and even people who never touched a Guilty Gear game a day in their life, are playing Strive and they're loving it. You know, they had a lot of fun in the open beta. I would hate for us to just be playing Guilty Gear amongst the same 5 people. These people that make these games, like Arxis doesn't make these games to cater to the same 5 people. What people who play fighting games and like pride themselves so hard on like these games being harder or what this is how it was back then, it's like, I feel you, I understand where you're coming from, but I've learned to accept that like for this genre or this industry for that matter to grow, it needs to expand to a larger audience. If they only cater to that small audience that are like the quote unquote hardcore, then that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it also leaves little room for newer players to come in and try. You have to understand, new people want to try these things, but if they know that it's too hard or they see it's too hard, they don't feel inclined to give it a go because, you know, he say, she say goes far, you know? As some person says, yeah, man, this game is super hard, dude, this game is really hard to get into. Not everyone's gonna get their interest piqued and go give it a try. They'll probably hear that and be like, all right, I'm good. I'll just watch you guys from afar. I've seen it happen so many times, and I've helped people who, you know, want to learn Guilty Gear get into it, and when they got into it, they're like, man, this isn't as hard as I thought. And I'm like, it's not, you know? But not everyone has that tenacity, and I think that's something that gets overlooked. Like, not every player that wants to play a fighting game, you know, has that tenacity to want to continue or to want to give it a try. Some people try it, lose, and just quit. They don't care anymore after that. So like, I understand that some people feel like these games should not coddle you, but it's still player versus player. This isn't like my team versus your team. This is player versus player. And if you're a seasoned fighting game player, you're just honestly not losing to a newer player who's never touched a fighting game. It's just not happening. It's just not. And I guess on the other front too, and I'm gonna hit this from so many different angles, so this is gonna be kind of long, guys. Some people who've been playing fighting games who maybe didn't have, a good run in a previous game might have a good run in this one. And to me, it's like, why should you be upset at that? Why should one be upset? Oh, well, he wasn't shit in Marvel 2. Now he's got like Marvel 3. Like, it is what it is. Like, that's the game. That is what it is. That is what it is. Like, they put in the time to be good at that one. It's a different game. So it's either you adjust or adapt or you get dusted, right? Well, oh man, he wasn't anything in Street Fighter 4. Now he's got like a Street Fighter 5, man. Street Fighter. No, don't be upset. It's a different game. You have to understand, you have the exact same opportunity as that player who wasn't doing well in the previous game that's doing well now. You have the same opportunity as they did. It's not like they got the game earlier than you. In some cases that happens, but it's not like they got the game, and when I say get the game early, like what, 2 or 3 days, maybe a week at most, whatever, right? But let's say that didn't happen, right? And that player and you got the game at the exact same time. You had the exact same time frame to come up with them. That's essentially your fault for not adapting and adjusting to the game. Instead of complaining, adjust, adapt. If it's not for you, then it's okay. No one's gonna be upset at you for not liking the game. If you want to play the older version and stick to that and keep sharpening your sword, there's nothing wrong with that. There's always gonna be a dedicated scene for like a said game. Even if a game doesn't really have like a super big scene, like I'm gonna throw a shout out to the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure All-Star Battle scene. Like, those guys, they have a really tight-knit Discord and they work, they play against each other. And they may not have like, they can't just turn the game on and get competition, you know what I mean? But the fact that they have a Discord and they can hit each other up to get games, that's always good. And your game being a Discord fighter isn't necessarily a bad thing. It may be a bad thing in terms of it may take you longer to get games. They can't just cut it on and get games. But the fact that you have people you can hit up that are dedicated to the game is better than nothing at all, right? Better than just playing by yourself in training mode or playing against the CPU, right? Or just playing against your little brother or your cousin who barely plays the game too, right? You flex on them and it's like, so what? Go play against the people who've still been playing. So, I don't know, this topic, it just stems into it branches into so many different areas, you guys. And like, I know I'm going a little bit long on this, and I think it's because I want to get all this out. So if this goes on a lot longer than what I think it is, I apologize for taking up a lot of your time. But I'm just kind of hip-shotting this and I really just want to knock this out, because I really don't like when people get upset at the fighting games getting easier. Like, you should be more upset at the overall. Like, I feel like you should be more upset at the overall like scheme, the overall horizon of the gaming industry. You should be more upset at basically it's kind of funny thinking about it in my head, right? It's like you should be more upset at the gaming industry as a whole, and it's not even like you should be more upset at the casual gamer for making things easier for you, but at the same time you shouldn't, because more people playing your game is a good thing. Like, why should you be mad? Like, if little Timmy down the street wasn't, playing before, but he's playing now, you should be happy about little Timmy playing the game now. Help foster the kid. Help him get better. Like, help him get into the scene. Help him grow, Like, having more people to play is good. Having more content out there for the game is good. Getting more people into the games are good. Like, do not let your prestige cloud, like, your judgment for having a larger scene. It's the same thing, and I even touch back with the Discord fighters. They promote their games to get more people to play it despite their games being dead. Melty Blood, for example. Freaking Bloody Roar. Like, I can look at all my Discords right now, dude. I'm in so many, like, Discord fighter freaking Discords. Like, it's crazy. Like, CVS 2, the people playing on that. Marvel 2. Like, come on. And they want people to continue playing despite them being old games. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, I think people always forget that, like, just because you don't like something, it doesn't, and you can have your opinion, do not get me wrong. I will never take away anyone's opinion on enjoying the older thing because the newer thing isn't what they like. And that's fine. Maybe there'll be a newer game that will tickle your fancy. If not, that's okay. There will always be people to play those older games, whether, Fightcade still exists. I'm just saying there's so many options for people to play some of these older games. It's almost amazing to me how much, some of these players, they tend to, crap on like the newer games. It's like, I get it. You're mad because this is quote unquote easier, but that's just the nature of this industry right now, whether you like it or not. And for what it's worth, you know, the industry being what it is now is what has a lot of casual people there. I mean, think of it this way, like so many casual people, like, I don't know, like the casual market makes up a good percentage of their sales. And I think this isn't unheard of. I'm just reiterating it for the sake of, so you know, casual makes up the biggest market. The hardcore fans will still be there. They may not like certain things, and it's understandable, but I don't know, I feel like it doesn't mean like you can't still support the series, you know. I had my gripes with Guilty Gear myself in Rev 2, and I still supported. I may not have played, but I still supported the streams. I still supported the streamers. I was still there looking at content. I was there every tournament to watch, you know, etc., etc. So I mean, it's support in my own way without having to play it, you know, and there's nothing wrong with that either. So at the end of the day, like, some mechanics, and I guess I'll put this out here too. Some mechanics I do think are kind of jacked up. Like, I do think crush counter has been a very difficult mechanic to deal with, kind of going on and off of Street Fighter 5. Like, that was kind of tough to deal with because obviously they're on big buttons, they're really good footsie buttons, and they lead to a lot of damage. Over the course of time, that has kind of like changed. You know, the meta has kind of shifted around how you utilize those things, so it's not as like, it's still prevalent, but it's not a very common complaint anymore from what I gather. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments below. But, you know, other mechanics, like, I understand that MK crushing blows are kind of like difficult to deal with. I feel like a lot of games have been adding those things for the hype factor, and I know to some extent some people see that and they're just like, why do you deserve that? I get it, and I understand, but they're there and you have to learn to deal with it. That's, at the end of the day, that's kind of what it boils down to. Crushing blows, you know, certain, you know, all these weird comeback mechanics. Some people don't like those things, and trust me, man, I understand that comeback mechanics are like comeback mechanics can be seen as scrubby or too easy or too this and too that. But then, like, the funny thing is, these said mechanics, they end up like, I don't feel like they end up hurting the game, because in the long run people learn ways to stop it. Like, for example, in Persona, you didn't want your opponent to get into Awakening, so you would, in some cases, some people would drop their combo to not let them go into Awakening, because Awakening gives them extra meter, and getting extra meter and access to another super is kind of scary, right? It's kind of like a desperation mode, like in KOF, right? You get access to like a level 3 you didn't have before, or super you didn't have before in general, right? Because your HP is low. So you can do things like drop your combos, or do specific combos that lead you into like an ender that doesn't lead your opponent damage wise into Awakening, and then you kill them on the next combo so they can't get into Awakening, you know? And while I do know that Awakening was an issue, a lot of players who play Persona, as far as I can tell, just did those things, and I watched it firsthand. Like, they're like, oh, about to go into Awakening, then they do like a small ender, and then like go for their Oki from that situation to blow them out of the water so they can't get into that mode. I can't see why you could not do that previously, or in other games. Like, I see it happen in Tekken a good bit, especially if you're against the wall. You get hit by a wall combo, you know, even though you're getting in the raid, you still got to get up. You know, there's I don't know, I just feel like certain comeback mechanics are not as balanced as others. But one thing to pay attention to is like the first iteration of a game, you know, doesn't always have the best balance when it comes to those kinds of mechanics. They need more data in order to like kind of figure out how to balance it, and that requires a player base. If there's no player base and there's nothing to balance, they'll just keep it the same way. So, and I know it's a very tough pill to swallow, especially if you like a game series and like they add these mechanics that are just like, why is this here, you know? But I think they're learning a little bit more and more that like pure on comeback mechanics don't really help newer players. The newer players still have to like play the game, you know? And I'm seeing it a little bit more and more with how they're doing things in fighting games. I mean, Strive doesn't really have any major comeback mechanic or anything like that. It's still pretty much just raw gameplay. So I don't know, I can go on and on about this. I think this is a very broad topic, but at the end of the day, I'm gonna say it again, I don't see anything really wrong with making fighting games accessible. I think the biggest, because the goal is to have more people playing the game, having more people like the game just like you do, or you did, if you will. Like, there are fans of these games that don't want to play the older ones because they're so hard for them. The newer game will eventually provide its nuances despite it being difficult. Do not allow your prestige to cloud your judgment on like what the game should be, because part of the problem is, you know, you have a perception of what the game should be in your head versus what it is, and you always have to play every game that you play, whether it's new or old, for what it is. You had to accept that back then, and you have to accept that now. Auto combos don't make or break a fighting game. They really don't. They're there for a reason. They have their purpose and they serve their purpose. They don't make or break the game. And yeah, accessibility is never a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. It's just the industry. That's the time that we live in right now. This is the timeline. This is how it is. This is how it's gonna be for a while, up until, you know, people, you know, show that there's a bigger interest in wanting to play harder to play games. It doesn't mean that those games, those harder to play games, don't have their player bases or their fans. They exist, but the larger majority is always going to be the casual market who want to play something that they can get their hands in. You know, they can get something they can sink their teeth into without having to spend like a millennia being good, you know. But I just want you guys to know that as someone who came from difficult fighting games to now easier fighting games, it didn't come easy. I learned to accept, and acceptance is one of the biggest things that will get you to go far in just about any gaming genre or any competitive gaming genre that you intend to play. If you don't learn to accept what the nuances are of the game, you can probably find something else. So let me go ahead and close out here and say that a lot of you guys who've been watching the videos, you know, I say this every time, you know, I'm gonna say it right. You've been watching the videos, you're not actually subscribed. I'm gonna encourage you guys, as per usual, to subscribe to the channel, stay up to date with anything and everything going on with this channel. I'm really enjoying Coffee with Kensou. This is a very fun series to keep going with, and yeah. I'll save more of this for another video. This is getting kind of long. So maybe we'll revisit this topic again soon enough, or maybe I'll make a part 2 of this at some point. But yeah, let me go ahead and get up out of here, and I will catch you guys in the next video. You guys stay safe out here in these COVID streets. Play more Guilty Gear. Insert Guilty Gear game here. Make sure you play it. I don't care. Just play it. Go play Dust Strikers or something. Go do that. Anyway, see you guys later. Take care. Peace.